Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and our producer Ed Salzadell, all directors at the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We are here to reassure you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today we have a special guest in Mr. Jim Bendewald. And Carl, you've been interacting with him. If you would introduce him, please.
Sure. Jim on the David Reeves Ministries, and I called him up. And Jim has a Master's of Divinity from Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary. And he and his wife have been missionaries in the U.S. with the Southern Baptist denomination. He's authored books, one called Evolution Shot Full of Holes. He has developed a unique CD-ROM program called Evidence the Bible is True. And he's a founder and director of the Evidence Press, a nonprofit organization that produces documentaries for evidence of creation. The Evidence Press has produced 5 documentaries, and we're about to discuss several of them. And one we showed in our SABSA program a few years back called Echoes of Jurassic is one we can start first. Jim, what can you tell us about Echoes of the Jurassic?
Okay, well, Echoes of the Jurassic is really all about the issue of soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And this is totally contrary to what we know about biology. I mean, if you are driving down the street and you happen to see an animal and that gets killed, it won't be long and that animal is destroyed as a result of, birds and various other animals and bacteria that destroy it. And so in order for something that dies to last, it has to be buried deeply and buried quickly. And so for dinosaur material, in this case we have dinosaur material that is soft, that was found in a layer that is identified as being 68 million years old. And so this goes completely contrary to the whole idea of what we know about biology. It just really doesn't make sense that way. And it's a fascinating story. It goes back to Dr. Mary Schweitzer. She first identified some cells in 1991 that looked like blood cells. And then in the year 2000, there was an excavation of a T-Rex. And this was identified since then as probably one of the best preserved T-Rexes that's out there. Anyway, there was a femur that was being excavated, and they were pulling it out with the helicopter, and it was like 2,000 pounds. So they felt that this is just too heavy, so they split it. They split it in half, and some parts from the inside were then sent to Dr. Schweitzer in North Carolina. And so she dissolved some of these hard materials with acid, and what was left over were some soft tissues. And then she published in 2005 in Science Journal. And this was just shook the evolution paleontology world. I mean, they just couldn't accept it. They couldn't believe it. They did everything they could to essentially throw her under the bus, because they figured that you can't have dinosaur tissue that has to be some organism, has to be some sort of contamination or something like that. Well, this story went worldwide, even as far as newspapers in China. It became a major news story with 60 Minutes and the BBC. I mean, you can go online, you can see some of these stories. Though Dr. Schweitzer is an old Earth creationist, she proved over and over again that what she has in her lab is in fact dinosaur soft tissue, not biofilm or some contaminant. We did this documentary with Dr. Kevin Anderson, who works for the Creation Research Society. So I first did a documentary with him the previous year, and so the Creation Research Society was eager to work with Evidence Press to put this documentary together called Echoes of the Jurassic. And so we went to Glendive, Montana 2 different times, and we weren't actually part of the dig. The reason for going there was in the previous year, I think it was 2013, they excavated a Triceratops horn. And so this horn, the reason they went for this particular horn was they intentionally were looking for soft tissue as a result of this article or a number of articles that Mary Schweitzer had been publishing. So they, Creation Research Society, were looking for soft tissue to help verify and document it as well. And sure enough, so they dig up this horn, which is in a very bad location. It's in Montana. Well, we know Montana is like, well, what's it like? In the wintertime, it's cold, freezing cold. In the summertime, it's super hot, which is not great for biomaterials.
Right.
And the location of the horn was really, it was only like a foot down. It was really not deep. It was partially exposed. And unfortunately, I wasn't part of that excavation, but we do have some pictures of it that we show.
I remember when Schweitzer's work first came out, that when she revealed her results to paleontologist Dr. Jack Horner, that his comment to her was, the creationists are going to love you. That was not a compliment from him, but it is material that we've used to a great extent. You are listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is sabbsa.org. Today we're having discussions with Jim Bendewald, who with Evidence Press, and let's start with a discussion about Evidence Press. Tell us about your vision for Evidence Press and how that got started.
Yeah, well, it got started while a church planter in California. I was out door to door communicating with people, and I felt the need to leave them with something, not just leave them. And so I started writing articles, and I would write an article. One of the articles was about creation and evolution. This resonated with some people, and I found that I could use this as a transition then bridge to the gospel. And in fact, I continue to do that these days here in Madison, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin. I'll have conversations while on camera with students, and in many cases I am able to transition to the gospel. So evolution has always been, for a long time for me, evolution has been very important. I think I have a high value for truth, and it just really bothers me when so many people really don't understand truth. In 2012, Evidence Press became a 501c3 organization, and with the intention to produce creation documentaries. And then the following year, we created the first documentary called Testing Evolution, Exposing Flaws. And this was done with Dr. Kevin Anderson. He's a biologist, and at the time, he was also a professor at the University of Arkansas. But he's also the director of the Van Andel Creation Research Center, the center there in Arizona. So I had this connection with Dr. Anderson. We went to Arizona and did the filming with him in this amazing church, and had a whole variety of different settings, and I think it really turned out great, and we were able to talk about a number of different topics that I think people will be very excited to hear about.
Now, as you said, Echoes of the Jurassic was not your first documentary. The first was Testing Evolution. Tell us a little bit more about what's in that documentary.
Sure. In Testing Evolution, you'll hear about the so-called 1% difference between humans and chimps. And I remember when I was first learning about this, it was just all over, it seemed like. A friend of mine would say to me, well, we're only, and this is a Christian, a creationist.
Right.
And he would say, well, we're only 1%, or we're so, this proximity between us and chimps. And it just really was a part of our culture, is that this concept that we had this close proximity. And I can never really understand it. All you have to do is look at a picture of a chimpanzee, and it's a completely different kind of face. All this hair everywhere, they're short, they have a completely different stature, and they don't talk. How can that be 1% different? It's just nutty to me. Well, it turns out that around the turn of the century, some articles started to get published, and that these articles were saying that, now you have to understand, around the turn of the century is when the genome was getting sequenced. And so more science is actually taking place, and they're actually getting data. And so these scientists are writing, well, it's not really 1%, it's probably more like 4%. Another article says 6.5%. Another article says 8%. Well, I've got an article in 2007 that it's titled Relative Differences, The Myth of the 1% by John Cohen. All right, so this is a published article in the journal Science. And here's the quote. In the cortex, for example, 17.4% of the connections were specific to humans. End quote. So just think about it. We're just talking about the brain. You're just talking about the brain between humans and chimpanzees. Humans have 17% more connections than the chimpanzee. Well, the brain is kind of important, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
Humans to chimpanzees.
If properly used.
So, to me, this whole thing, it just illustrates a very frustrating problem in that evolutionists and scientists are they're like modern-day priests.
Right.
They have all this power. It's like the society just looks at them and go, well, what they say, if they say it, if you have enough of them saying it, then everybody just simply believes it. It's really sad. And then in this case, the 1% difference, this has been touted for like 20, 30 years.
20 or 30 years. Yep.
Yeah, we're not talking about just a few years. You're talking about scores of years where it infiltrates our society and where people are swallowing this and they're believing it and they're saying, well, you see, this is positive evidence of evolution. And then
when it is not.
It gets overturned, and what do people, and what happens? The scientists don't apologize. They don't come out and say, oh, well, I guess we were wrong. No, it just disappears.
No, we don't get
about it anymore.
Right. We don't get good retractions. Jim, we're going to have you back for another program. This is fascinating stuff.